How can you cast all your anxieties on God? Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to Psycho Bible, babbling about psychology and theology. I'm back with another reflection, a reflection on a therapy session. This is going to be one on a topic I don't talk that much about, but I have to deal with frequently in my therapy sessions with clients, and that's anxiety. I want to share some tips and insights with you that I gave to a client recently that I hope will help you if you're dealing with anxiety yourself or you know someone who does. I myself, I don't tend to deal with anxiety that much, only if there's a stressful situation I'm dealing with. I grew up in a home with a lot of anxiety, usually about finances. If anything, I tend to uh, get anxious when I'm around people who are anxious because it brings back too many memories of what I grew up with. But God, it's been working on me over the past several years to, especially since in therapy you're dealing with so many people with anxiety issues, that I've had to develop more compassion for those with anxiety so that I can be uh, helpful in those moments rather than kind of annoyed or perturbed by their anxiety. So here's the situation. I have a client just probably with generalized anxiety disorder, some OCD, just very anxious in general, and I've been coaching and working with him. We've done a lot of trauma work as well. But he still has anxiety issues. He tends to get very worried about things and it gets to the point where he becomes paralyzed with his fear and gets himself so worked up that it got to the point more recently where he had to do an intensive outpatient program where just seeing him once a week or once every other week is not sufficient. He needs some additional help. So he had to take a medical leave from work. He got so anxious over a side effect, a physical side effect that he was experiencing from a medication that he was on. And so he got so worried that he wouldn't be able to do his job, he wouldn't be able to perform his duties at work, that he actually stopped doing his work. So it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I was like, you probably need some more intensive help. So he's been doing an intensive outpatient program, or IOP. And then he's been anxious about returning to work, worried, well, it's this side effect will impact my ability to do my work. And will I be able to handle it? And what will people think of me if they hear that I have some side effect, or they hear that I have some anxiety issues? And what if I can't do my job? Then I'll be fired, or I'll have to quit, and then I won't be able to afford to live, and I'll have to move back home with my parents, and I'm in my mid-40s, and I'm worried that my dad's gonna die, and it's just what he goes down this train of thought, and it's just one worry after another. Okay? So how do we deal with anxiety? Let's start with understanding what anxiety is. And it's probably best to really just get rid of this word anxiety. I'm using the word anxiety in this video, but the word anxiety isn't that helpful because the way we think about anxiety these days is, at least in American culture, is we view anxiety as like some condition that comes upon you and you thus have anxiety, and therefore it causes these symptoms in your life. And it's just a wrong understanding of what anxiety is. It's better to view anxiety as a threat response, okay? So is your fight or flight response being triggered because you're detecting a threat? Now, it can be a real threat, an identified threat, or it could be a perceived or anticipated threat. So this brings us to what the difference is between anxiety and fear. Now, we can look at anxiety as a type of fear, or is on the continuum of fear, but true fear or terror is a type of threat response in which there is an identified threat, whereas anxiety is a response to an unidentified threat. This is the illustration I use with my clients all the time. So fear would be walking through the woods and seeing a bear running at you, okay? There's a real threat. You're actually in real danger, and there's an identified threat. This bear is actually there. You're not seeing things, you're not imagining it. There's really a bear, it's running at you. Fear would be the appropriate response, fear or terror. And so the uh, physiological reaction you get of your heart racing, of getting tunnel vision, your digestive system stopping, and all your energy being diverted to your limbs so you can either fight the threat or run and flee from the threat or climb, that's appropriate. That's needed. All that energy that's being built up in that moment is needed in order to either fight the threat or flee from the threat. Or if you determine in that split second that you can do neither, then you freeze and you play dead and hope you can survive that experience. So either way, the fear in that moment is necessary because there's a real identified threat. It's actually happening. It's an appropriate response to a real danger, something that can actually hurt you or kill you or someone else that you care about. We can feel fear for someone else that we have an attachment to or a concern for. Anxiety, however, is walking through the woods and thinking there might be a bear. There is no bear. You don't see a bear. You don't hear a bear. There's no sign of a bear actually in that moment, but you're worried there might be a bear. And when you believe it so strongly, even if it's more at a subliminal level, just there's some patterns you picked up on, and so it might be more unconscious, it can trigger that anxiety or that fear response, that fight or flight reaction. So the feeling in your body physiologically is pretty much the same as when you're anxious, when you're responding to a perceived or imaginary or anticipated threat, as if you were dealing with an identified threat. Now, it becomes a phobia when there's no rational cause to be concerned about that particular threat. So phobia would be you're walking not in the woods worried there might be a bear, but you're walking in downtown Center City, Philadelphia, worried there might be a bear. Okay, now it would be reasonable to have some anxiety about maybe gang activity or dealing with a pickpocket or something like that if you're in inner city Philadelphia. But to be worried about there being a bear or a mountain lion in the city would make no sense. So that would be a phobia, an irrational fear. It makes some sense to have some anxiety if you're in a situation where there's a likelihood of that threat happening. Okay? So you're having a threat reaction, but you must understand that it's not an identified threat. It's not a real threat. It's a potential threat. Or it's an anticipatory threat. Anxiety is usually anticipatory. You're anticipating a threat. You're expecting a threat. You're looking for a threat. So the first thing to do is what we call neuroception. Assess your environment to see, am I really in danger? Is there really a threat happening right now? Not is there the possibility of a threat happening, but is it actually present? Okay? So, for example, I tell my clients, hey, are we in danger right now? Or is there a threat of us dying right now in this session? No. Could something happen? Sure. A gas main could blow up. A meteor could fly out of the sky and hit us in the office and wipe us out in one instant. But is it actually happening right now? And is there a strong likelihood of it happening? Is it imminent? Is it about to happen? No. No, so it would be ridiculous for us to be anxious while we're sitting comfortably here in the therapist's office, worrying about a meteor flying out of the sky and hitting us, even though that's something that could happen. Okay, so we assess your environment to see, am I dealing with an imaginary threat or anticipated threat, a perceived threat, or an actual identified threat? And if I can assess that I'm not really in danger at this present moment, then I need to remind myself that I'm not actually in danger, therefore I do not need the threat reaction that my body is producing in this moment. Okay? So recognizing that truth can take the edge off a little bit. Usually it's not enough though. So we then need to relax the body, because the body is still reacting as if there is a threat. We've picked up on it in some way, something about the environment, something in our mind is fitting a template that we already had about a threat. And so our body's producing all this excess adrenaline and noradrenaline, or epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol. And so we need to respond to that by either expending it, using up that energy, going for a good jog and getting that runner's high and then relaxing, or just working on relaxing the body in the present moment. Doing some sort of relaxation exercise like deep breathing, muscle relaxation, a safe place visualization, prayer, while you're also coaching yourself on redirecting your attention away from those things that aren't actually happening and focusing on the present moment. So this is why a lot of times therapists, we recommend to our clients staying focused on the present. Be present. Because when we're anxious, we're not really in the present moment. We're thinking about all these things that could happen, but actually aren't. Or we're anxious about things that already happened in the past, or things that might be happening somewhere else where we're not, that we can't do anything about. We're worried about the future that we actually do not know, so we have all these uncertainties. So we need to redirect our attention to the present moment and then relax the body. Now, if we're dealing with more of a potential threat that is somewhat likely, then wisdom would require you to do what you can to prepare for that threat within reason. Okay? There's a limit to what you can do and what is useful for you to do. So you have to make a choice to limit how much you're going to prepare for something. You can be a prepper. Yes, it could be that we might face an apocalypse of some sort, and we should all be preppers living in the woods and having a homestead instead of being reliant on a grid. Yeah, you could do that. Or you could kind of bank your trust that the grid will survive and you'll be able to afford to continue to pay for electricity and all that. But it might be wise to at least be aware of some basic survival skills. For example, God told Noah there's going to be a flood. Noah just didn't sit around worrying about it, nor did he say, well, God will give me what I need, and if it were to happen, I'll be all right. No. God told him in advance that there's going to be this danger. It's not happening right now. He wasn't in danger right there at the moment. But he trusted that God was telling him the truth, that there will be this threat, and so he prepared by building the ark. Okay? So if there's something you can do about the thing you're anxious about, if that thing you're anxious about is likely to happen, if it's imminent, if it's on the horizon, you could see it approaching, okay, the wise thing to do would be to prepare for that. But most of the time, we're dealing with something in our anxiety that is not imminent, that we don't have much cause to really believe is about to happen. And so that's a situation we need to correct our thinking, as well as relax the body. And so this is where some of the scriptures about anxiety can actually be useful. If we don't understand what anxiety is, sometimes these scriptures can be less than helpful because they're used as kind of a bludgeon against us, where we're trying to white knuckle it. Don't be anxious. Don't be anxious. Okay? But if we understand anxiety to be about a threat reaction to a threat that's not actually happening, then the scriptures make sense. Then, like it says in 1 Peter 5:7, you can cast all your anxieties upon him because he cares for you. So we understand right here that my worries about things that aren't actually happening, or at least aren't happening yet, or now, or might not ever happen, but they might happen, the worries about those potential things, those potential threats, I can give to God. Why? Because he cares for us. So I can trust that if any of those things might happen, that he will then give me what I need in that moment. Yes, I am to prepare, but there are some things you just can't fully prepare for. And so that's where we trust God to give us what we need in those moments to handle that potential threat. And this is one of the other keys to dealing with anxiety or just negative thinking in general. It's something I tell my clients all the time. I'll have to do another video on this to go more in depth. But the key, the solution to negative thinking is not necessarily positive thinking. You could be anxious about, say, my client, anxious about his father dying. Even though his father is not dealing with some sort of critical injury or terminal illness, he's just aging. Okay? So it's inevitable he's going to die at some point. But if he's anxious about his dad dying, it would be wrong for him to pray, God, don't let my dad die. Because, of course, your dad's going to die. You need to actually pray, God, help me to not be anxious about him dying. But if he were then to try to use positive thinking to deal with the anxiety about his dad dying, that would look like, God, I trust that my dad will never die, and I'll never have to deal with the pain and sorrow of my dad dying. That's positive, sure, but is it realistic? No. The key, the solution to negative or distressing thinking or distorted thinking is realistic thinking, which when you're dealing with someone with anxiety issues usually is more positive. So we'll go into that in another video more in depth at another time. But we have to eventually come to a place where we accept the possibility of some of these negative things we're worried about happening. And so we can do that when we pray because we trust that, yeah, this thing might happen that I'm worried about. I can cast that on Christ because I can trust that if that were to happen, or when it might happen, that He will give me the strength I need, He'll give me the resilience, the peace, the clarity of mind that I will need in that moment because He cares for me. And now we can apply the next passage that we hear a lot about anxiety. Philippians 4, 6 through 8. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So let's break this down a little bit more. Do not be anxious about anything. This is not a command to have direct control over your emotions. All right? We don't have the capacity to directly control our emotions. We can prevent certain emotions and we can respond to our emotions through behaviors and thought change to relax ourselves so that the emotion can change. But emotions are one of these things we do not have direct control over. You can't just make yourself anxious or not anxious or at will. What he's saying, though, is do not assess a threat where there is no threat. So do not be anxious about anything. Anxiety, if we understand anxiety correctly, it is anticipating a threat. It's perceiving a threat that's not there, or it's not actually happening at this moment. So he's saying, do not anticipate threats that are not actually about to happen. Instead, for things that are valid threats, by prayer and petition, present those requests to God. God, help me with this current threat. Help me with what I need in this moment. And you can do that with thanksgiving because we know that this God who is all-powerful and loves us and He cares for us will give you what you need in that moment. And this is what enables us to have peace, to have a wholeness. So there's not this division or this anxiety, but then I can't say anything about it. No, we can actually be at peace. It can be a wholeness within us because we can trust that I can present my request to God. Okay? I can get out of this double bind of, well, I feel anxious about something, but if I say it, then I'm sinning because I'm being anxious and I shouldn't be anxious about anything. No. If there's a true valid threat, I can express my concern about that threat and I can trust that God will respond. He'll double loop with me. See my video on the self states. And then He'll give me a peace that transcends all understanding. Because if my understanding is that there's a threat, how can I feel peace? But when he shows me, no, you're not in danger because I have you. All right, even if there's a valid threat, even if there's a fear situation, I can still have peace because I know he's even greater than what I fear. And that ultimately his will triumph, even if it means my death or the death of someone I love. That is not the end of everything. So that's why even in the midst of a terrible circumstance, I can have peace. Easier said than done. That's where I become more dependent and rely on him to give me what I need. And so to reinforce this, I reminded my client of the Israelites in the wilderness. When they're in the wilderness, God gave them manna to sustain them, to give them their daily bread, to give them what they needed each day. But he only gave them what they need for that day. Because this is a principle that we can understand. God gives you what you need, but when you need it. The peace of mind you think you'll need if you lose your job and have to find a new job and have to figure things out, you don't need that right now when your job is not being threatened yet. You need that when that threat actually happens. So God doesn't give you the peace of mind in advance. He doesn't give you the strength you need at the funeral of your father in advance. He gives you that strength when you need it in that moment. And so with the Israelites, he gave them their manna each day. And if they tried to store it up for the next day, it would spoil. Because that would be them trying to rely on themselves to get as much of this strength, much of this peace that they think they'll need for the future, and gather up and store it up for themselves. No. God wants us to be utterly reliant on him for the things that we cannot get for ourselves, and relying on him to give it to us when we need it. The only time they were allowed to gather extra, and he instructed them to gather extra, was on Fridays, because he wanted them to not gather, not work on the Sabbath. And so on the Sabbath they could trust that he provides all their needs because he gave already what they needed in advance. And they could also trust that he'll give them more manna the next day. The cycle will repeat. So when we're praying, what we do is we take the thing we're anxious about and understand that it's not the thing we're anxious about that we should be casting upon God. It's your anxiety about the thing you're anxious about. That's the anxiety itself is what you cast upon God. Cast your anxiety on him. See, when my client was trying to pray to help calm himself, it wasn't working. Why wasn't it working? Because even though his dad was not dying, he was not actually in danger of death, at least not imminent death, he was praying to God, God, help me with that dad so my dad doesn't die. And so what he was doing was he was validating the anxiety. He was treating something that was not actually happening as if it was happening. So we must be careful when we pray to God, not to validate our fears, but to recognize that, this is not a real threat, but God, I'm anxious about it. Help me with my anxiety. Give me what I need right now with this anxiety. Okay? That I will trust you if such a thing were to happen. That's what we cast on him. So we cast our anxiety about potential threats onto Christ, and then if and when some of those things happen, which certain things will inevitably happen, then we receive from him the grace we need to handle that situation, to either be delivered from it or to endure it and to be sustained through it. So just as the Israelites had to use up their manna the one day, and then they might have been worried, well, is more manna going to appear tomorrow? They take that anxiety about that worry, about manna coming tomorrow, and they take the anxiety and cast upon him. Just trust. I'll trust that you will provide in the morning. And he did. More manna appeared. Because he cares for us. So I pray this is helpful for you. As a recap, when you're feeling anxious. First, neuroception. Assess the environment to see if you're actually in danger, if there's a real identifiable threat. If there is a threat, then utilize that energy that's coming up to help fight or flee from the threat. Do what you need to do. If there's not, but the threat is likely to happen, then do what you can in wisdom and with trust that you can't do everything, so God will give you what you need for what you can't do. So prepare for that potential threat if it's a likely threat to happen. Okay, so that's being wise. So for example, with my client, when it came to the side effect from medication, and he was worried about it affecting the way he could do his job, well, there was a tool he could get that could help him with that side effect that he was having. That's a way to prepare for it. So there you go. Do what you can to prepare. If you're worried about your parents dying, well, at least have a will. Have life insurance policies. Okay, discuss those things with your parents. Have a plan for when they inevitably do pass away. So be prepared in a reasonable manner. Then, if there is no identifiable threat, relax the body. All right, tell your body, false alarm, don't need all this excess energy you're producing. Let's relax. Okay? Do some sort of self-soothing exercise. Talk to someone who's calm and rational, can help you co-regulate in that moment. You know, do different breathing exercises, do different things to self-soothe, go for a walk, get some fresh air. All right? Then ask God to help you with that anxiety and trust that He will give you the grace you need if anything you're anxious about may ever happen. And you can trust Him because He cares for you. And like I always say, you can trust that He loves you freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully.